We're kicking it off with a new event series of AMAs, or Ask Me Anything, where we'll bring in highly requested leaders in the entrepreneurship space for our attendees to essentially pick their brain, learn from their experience, and ask them, well, anything. So kicking it off with our first AMA, we of course had to invite Grid110's incredible CEO, the woman behind it all, Miki Reynolds. I will be asking Miki a series of questions and everyone here today submitted. So thank you attendees for submitting some really great questions for Miki. But also, feel free as the conversation flows. If any follow-up questions or topics come to mind, feel free to write those down in the chat and we'll be sure to address those as well. Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna actually pass it off to Miki to give a little more background, quick intro on herself, and then we will be getting right into the questions shortly after.
Thanks so much, Maya. Hi, everybody. It's so lovely to see some of your faces or your profile photos. That's totally fine too. I'm down with that. Just the fact that you chose to be here with us for the time that we have, the hour or so, I know how valuable and precious time can be. So I'm honored. We are honored that you chose to spend this time with us. So thanks for being here. As Maya said, I'm Miki Reynolds. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Grid110. For those of you not familiar, we're an early stage startup accelerator and community focusing on entrepreneurs, mostly here in Los Angeles, but also elsewhere. We've been around for about 7 years. So we just finished our 22nd cohort and we're going into our 23rd this summer. I see some alumni griddies in the room here. So lovely to have you all back. A little bit about my background. So born and raised in California. I'm originally from the Bay Area, East Bay, Alameda, Little Island, if you've ever heard of it. I came down to LA to go to UCLA for college and I never left. I've been in tech for my entire career. So I started working for the movie studios. I worked for MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and for Fox, running digital projects, building digital products, kind of learning everything that I could as someone from a non-technical background. So I was a sociology major in school, but have always been fascinated with the internet and all things digital, and wanted to find my pathway however I could. I then spent about 6 years working for a software development company, building products, integrations, specifically in e-commerce. So worked with a lot of well-known brands. And then left there to go work for General Assembly, a tech education school. I helped them launch their downtown LA campus, so help them expand within the city of Los Angeles, working with folks that were interested in either breaking into tech or leveling up in tech. I see one of my former colleagues here, Jason, who's still at GA. And we have a really fun working relationship with them, just supporting them however we can in the ecosystem. And then started Grid110 with 6 amazing people about 7 years ago in an effort to really build a community that we felt like didn't exist at the time and to support entrepreneurs however I could. I'm super passionate about what's happening in Los Angeles when it comes to entrepreneurs and contributing to the ecosystem here. And I've been really fortunate to connect with other community builders and ecosystem builders across the country and see exciting things that are happening in other areas like Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Mark is from. And I think it's just really exciting time to be building, in the innovation economy. I think there are so many opportunities. As scary as maybe kind of what the industry looks like right now and what the economy is doing, I think that there are still great opportunities for people to excel and succeed, and we're excited to play a role in that. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Oh,
and my dog says hi also.
Right on cue. Oh, how sweet. Well, thank you, Miki. Thank you for that intro. So we did get a lot of questions, some related to Miki's personal experience, some specific to Grid110, others about just the startup landscape in general. So I'm going to try my best to make sure we kind of get to dip into each of those topics. But then again, if anyone had like a burning question that we haven't got to or anything, feel free to drop it in the chat as well. So kicking it off, This was a really interesting question, and I think it has to also relates really well to a lot of founders in the sense of, trial and error and learning from your failures on this journey of being a founder. But someone wanted to know, what was your most significant setback and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so it actually is the reason, or at least for me, why Grid110 exists today. I mentioned where I worked for a software development company for about 6 years after a stint in entertainment. I started as a project manager, worked my way up and handled everything from product to client deliveries, and ultimately was the VP. My title was literally the VP of Get Shit Done, because they couldn't find a title that encompassed better than that specific phrase of just being a catch-all and doing everything that needed to be done. But the company actually ended up shutting down. And so, we ran out of money, didn't have a smart business model, a bunch of different things just led to the demise of the company. We were probably about 30, 35 people at that time. And it came around the holiday time. And it was a really tough transition. It was something that I hadn't really been anticipating would happen, and had been through downsizing. So both companies that I worked for before, large global entertainment corporations, went through rounds of layoffs and downsized, and I kind of maneuvered through all of that. But it was a lot more difficult when it was in such a small environment and with people that I ultimately became to care a lot about because I'd helped to build the team. And over the holidays, which is kind of like ruminating in the, what the hell do I do next type of a scenario. And I was really at a loss for what I was going to do next. I really wasn't sure. I was supremely burnt out from what I had been doing for sure. I learned a lot with the jobs that I had, but ultimately wasn't finding myself incredibly fulfilled in the work that I was doing, and wanted to find something that was maybe a little bit more mission aligned, but I really didn't know what that meant for myself. So I just took some time to kind of take stock in, the types of environments that I wanted to work in, how I wanted to feel at work every day, who I wanted to surround myself with. And I knew I wanted to be around, wildly creative people. I knew I wanted to be, as much as I can, the dumbest person in the room and surround myself with people that are smarter than me, so that I can continue to learn. I knew I wanted to find something that I would be excited about, waking up to every day and contributing to, versus feeling like this is a job that I have to show up for. And it was in just kind of trying to discover what those opportunities could be like for myself, trying to, figure out, are there opportunities in my own area? So I live in downtown Los Angeles. If you're familiar with the tech ecosystem of LA, it primarily centers around the West Side area. So Santa Monica, Venice, Playa Vista is formerly known as Silicon Beach. And I had worked in that space, but living in downtown, it can take you anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours to commute there. And I was done with that. I wanted to find something that was closer to home. Downtown was becoming this really emerging part of Los Angeles, where people could live, work, and play all at the same time. Lots of creatives here, lots of entrepreneurs. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I, network my way into my next thing? Where are the startups that are down here? Where are the tech companies? How can I figure out something that might make sense for me? And I was just really struggling to find that for myself. I knew I could go to the West Side where there were events and co-working spaces and things that were happening. General Assembly was there. And I was just really at a loss. So anytime that there was some sort of event, like a free 90-minute coding class, actually it was a GA facilitated workshop in downtown LA for free, like learn how to code in 90 minutes. I was like, great, that sounds like fun. I went to a couple of new space openings for creatives and just chatted with people and was trying to figure out, are there others like me that care about, some sort of finding a community, building a community, tapping into this like entrepreneurial tech ecosystem? Is there an opportunity for us to potentially like create or build something here? And so ultimately the two kind of pathways that led out from being let go, laid off, unemployed for the first time in my life post-college, was creating two opportunities that I was really excited about and that have changed my career trajectory forever since then. The first was being brought on to General Assembly to help them launch the downtown campus, and to help build that community out for 3 years and working with people that were interested in breaking into tech or leveling up in their careers. And then starting Grid110 at the very same time, it was focused on downtown entrepreneurs to start, providing them with the resources, community, and things that they needed to get their businesses off the ground. So what was a very, to me, very difficult time where I personally struggled a lot with physical and mental burnout, with trying to figure out what like my path looked like in front of me, ultimately became an opportunity for me to create the next thing for myself. And so I feel really grateful that that sequence of events happened, because I don't know that I would have found this pathway otherwise.
That's amazing. Yeah, great story of kind of, you know, the failure, not so much failure, but steering you in the way that, you didn't necessarily expect from the beginning, but then finding something that was really meant for you. And I also like how you touched on burnout and kind of like mental fatigue and how that played a role. And that kind of has to do with the next question we got, which is, as a busy CEO, and just someone with a lot on your plate in a lot of different networks, how do you practice self-care, setting boundaries and just looking after your mental health in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm happy that this has become more of something that people are talking openly about. So whether you see, threads on Twitter about, people asking or just sharing about how they're being more conscientious of their mental health, how we're talking about burnout, the things that it can lead to. So I definitely didn't really, I don't think, understood what the concept was until I actually was in it, and definitely feeling it from a mental and physical standpoint. I definitely didn't really understand what anxiety was like until I found myself in moments of feeling just like, the weight on your shoulders and the responsibility of carrying this team, et cetera. And so I think a couple of things that I did like really early on at that point, I very much for like the first 10 years of my career was a workaholic. I was first person in, last person out. But like maybe because I was oftentimes the only woman in teams on executive groups, that I felt like I had to overcompensate for that in some way. And it really led to me not taking care of myself at all. I always put, the company first, the team first, the project first, whatever it might be. And so when I had this period of transition, a very simple thing that I did was I turned off all notifications on my phone. So right now, all I get are text messages and some social media. For the last 6 or 7 years, I have not received any email push notifications. I don't get them on my Apple Watch. Like I go out to coffee or dinner with some friends and I see them constantly looking at their phones or on their watch. And I'm just like, can we just spend this quality time together? And so I think the opportunity be like the mindfulness is not just, meditation and things like that. I think it's really being present for yourself, with your teammates, with, whoever it is that you're spending time with. I think that's a really important boundary to set for yourself. I also think it's important to set those boundaries so that other people can respect them. So if you're clear on them, I mean, that we have a pretty like lax kind of work environment, right? So I don't contact anybody after like 6:00 p.m. unless it's like a super urgent thing, which rarely ever happens. I don't contact you on the weekends. I want there to be a separation of work and life. I think that's really important. I didn't have that for a long time on my own accord, because for me, I often just see like there's a work-life blend for me where I might go to an event at night and it's kind of work related, but it's something that I actually enjoy. And for some people, that might not be the case. They want a clear line and separation between work and life, and I want to respect that. I recognize that some people, like, this isn't everything for everyone. So I think it's really important to be clear on that. I think the times that I have not involved or incorporated some type of movement into my day. So like whether it's fitness, a long walk, I have dogs, as you heard, so I will walk them frequently. But I think there have definitely been times, especially during the pandemic, where I've gotten into like just really bad headspaces or ruts or lack of motivation. And you feel it, it permeates within kind of your mental and emotional space. You feel it in your work. And I think the times where I have prioritized that, I feel so much better. And I think there's a little bit more clarity. And so whatever that thing is for you, just, I think the opportunity to really to do something that brings joy to you, as the movement does for me. So whether it is an hour-long walk, or I randomly took a rowing class this week because it was on ClassPass and it was super fun. And, I think it's just finding the thing that works for you. For maybe you play music, maybe you like to dance, whatever it might be. I think if you can prioritize that for yourself, and I think oftentimes, we'll often say like, I don't have the time, I have so many things that I need to get done. But again, if you're not prioritizing yourself, if you're not taking care of you, everything else will suffer. So I think it really is important to like find that time, to carve it out, to put it on your calendar if you need to tell your team, hey, this is like a non-negotiable for me. Like, please don't schedule over this, please don't move it, whatever that might be. I think the biggest thing that I've done for myself this past year is actually therapy. So first time ever, I've been doing it for about a year. I go almost weekly, and I have found it to just be, again, a time that I can prioritize myself and my needs in spaces where, even if you have close friends or family members that you feel like you can talk to about things, it's just always helpful to have somebody who I think is a little bit more attuned to helping you through frameworks and decisions and things like that. So I think that that's something that I feel really grateful to have the opportunity to do, that is fortunately covered by insurance. And that I think has really helped from a mental standpoint of navigating some really challenging things the past few years.
Thank you, Miki. That is so insightful. And I agree. I really do love how this topic is beginning to be talked about more openly, and with everything from, like you mentioned, pausing notifications to getting moving to therapy, whatever it is for each person, just making that a priority. And it's cool for me to hear how your personal journey of getting to this point of being able to find the balance, because I see that so much in our company, how much you create that culture. So it's really cool to hear kind of the history behind that and why you found it's really important. And we got a question in the chat that I actually really like. Thank you, Denise, for submitting this. But she's wondering, do you have a coach or perhaps a mentor? And if so, how do you work with them? And any suggestions for a good coaching relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that, Denise. I have worked with coaches before. So I have a really good friend who is a coach when he was just getting started with his practice a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to work with him and kind of be a little bit of a guinea pig, and really understand like what coaching was all about, because I really didn't understand it. I've heard of the term life coach, executive coach, et cetera, and have seen now just a lot of different types of coaches, whether it's nutrition or relationships or even like intimacy. I think it's really interesting that people are specializing in these different areas to really help us navigate the things that we're honestly never taught how to do as we're growing up, right? So whether it's communication or dating or whatever it might be. And so I think the thing that I learned from my experience with that first coach was how to have difficult conversations, and with myself and with like another person. And then also just how to share things, like get outside of my head. Like I'm a very introverted, internal type of, I overthink, I overanalyze everything. And it was really helpful just to be able to like put those things out on the table with somebody else and talk through them. And the frameworks that I learned for how to kind of navigate being an overthinker and an overanalyzer and somebody who's super hard on themselves, and navigating a lot of like bad self-talk. And so I think like learning how to navigate those things were really important tools that I got from them. I was also part of a program for executive director, like nonprofit executive directors, that came with a coach that I got for a year. And it was through coaching that I actually felt like, I think it actually is time for me to go to therapy. I think that there are things that continually come up for me that might be beyond a coach's capacity to do and to work with you on. And it was really the kind of catalyst for me actually starting therapy. So I remember when I stopped working with my coach, I told him how much I appreciated our time together. That he helped me navigate some like really difficult times in the first year of the pandemic, but also was the reason why I started therapy. In terms of, I guess, finding a good coach or coaching relationship, I think the thing that was helpful for me was understanding the things that I wanted to work on. I came to that first meeting with that second coach with like, here are all the things that I know that I want to work on in this relationship with you. And I think being really transparent around that. I did the same thing with therapy, to be honest. I came to my onboarding meeting with the therapy practice that I go to, and I just had this list of like, here are all the things that I struggle with. And these are all the things that I would like to try and work through. And I imagine that, you know, maybe we can only work on one at a time, but these are things that I have the self-awareness about myself that I've had a hard time overcoming, or I can't do it alone, and would love to seek out help in this way. So I think that was a helpful thing. And it might be something that you have to kind of like date around to try and find the right type of person, depending on your communication styles. Or are you looking for somebody that is maybe more on the nurturing, supportive side? Are you looking for someone who's like on like the tough love side, who's gonna push you to your edges and challenge you a little bit? So I think it's, you know, being really clear on what you feel comfortable with in that type of relationship, and seeking out somebody who perhaps is complementary to what you're looking for.
Definitely. And it's really interesting to hear about how you talked about the transition from the coach actually, you know, pushing you to go into therapy. That's great. And your coaches must love you coming ready with the list. I don't think, you know, we talk about wanting to be coachable, that being a good quality in many people. And I can see that shining through as well. So thank you for that. And now that we're about a third of the way through, I did want to start transitioning some questions onto Grid 110. We did have a few people who are wondering, especially with some of our founders in the room. We got quite a few questions asking, what is your expected future vision for Grid 110? And what would you like to see Grid 110 expanding into, you know, let's say in 5 years time, 10 years time?
Always such an interesting question. A long time ago, I stopped being that person that had a 5 or 10-year plan, because shit happens, things change. And just like what we talk about with entrepreneurs, like you kind of just have to navigate and be nimble. And, you know, sometimes you can't always be proactive. You have to be a little bit reactive. I think we all know that from the past few years. And so I think when we first started out, I think we had a lot of different potential visions. I mean, we had 7 co-founders. I'm sure everybody had a different idea of what they thought this thing would end up looking like. I don't know that this was even in our wildest dreams of where we would be now and what we thought about back then. We certainly didn't set out to start an accelerator program, and nothing of this caliber and size, and with all the founders that we've worked with. But I think, you know, we've just really navigated it as it came along to us. And so as opportunities presented themselves, so we really listened to what the needs were of the founders. So when we first started, for the first 2 years, we worked with 10 companies a year, and they were all fashion tech focused. When we came into our first significant amount of funding through the city of Los Angeles, we decided to like scale up and work with more founders. And so we kind of dropped the fashion tech focus. We became a little bit more inclusive in terms of working with any type of founder. And we really meant any type of founder. So we had an idea stage program. So you didn't have to have anything. You could have a back of a napkin like concept that you wanted to work with us on. And we would do that. You didn't have to have a tech or tech enabled business. It could be something that was more physical, like physical presence, brick and mortar. It could be a CPG product. And so we really just wanted to see like who was out there and how could we help support all the different faces of what entrepreneurship looks like. Pre-pandemic, when we thought about what expansion would look like, in my head, I actually thought about it. You know, I took a lot of things from my time at General Assembly, and I thought about it in like this General Assembly type model. So for those who are not familiar, and Jason, maybe you can correct me because I have no idea how many campuses there are these days. But when I was there were about like 12 or 15 campuses. And then I think they scaled up and then pandemic hit. But it was this idea of these kind of concentrated hubs in these emerging startup and tech cities that were a place where people could come to for events and get skills training, and collaborate. And they were really innovative and wildly creative environments where you could, they had whiteboard paint on the walls, so you could draw and sketch out on the walls, and the desk had the same thing. And so this really just like imaginative spaces. And the idea in my head that I had was that Grid110 could do the same thing for entrepreneurs. And so that what we started with the city of Los Angeles, we could do in other emerging startup cities. And then the pandemic hit and we had to go fully virtual because in pre-pandemic, all of our programs took place in person. We were based out of a co-working space. We really felt strongly about the importance of bringing people together in the same room and the opportunities that could emerge from that, just from like organic conversations that you could have or working out of the space together. And so we felt like community was best built in person. And then when we were forced to go virtual, it was like, we don't know how long this is going to be, but our focus then became, let's build the best in class virtual program that we can. And we were really thoughtful around a lot of details to make sure, like, how do we kind of compensate for the community aspect of this if this is going to be virtual? How can we make sure that these founders feel connected to each other through computer screens? And then it really opened our eyes to what like scale and accessibility could look like if we expanded, digitally versus in person. And so actually earlier this year, we had a goal, which was launching our first nationwide program. And so we worked with 20 companies from 11 cities around the country in partnership with Sauce & Co., which is a venture capital fund here in Los Angeles. The program is called Friends and Family. It really aims to fill the gap of the friends and family kind of round of funding that quite honestly is laughable because most people don't have access to those types of networks to start their businesses. And so we wanted to do that in a way that was really meaningful through capital, as well as relationships and community and access to people that could really be game changing and helping you to build your business. And so where we take it next, like I'm taking this year by year, I think as everybody else does. I'm sure our funders would probably like to have a more solid plan in place. But I think we want to continue, the work that we've done here in Los Angeles and kind of like keeping one foot here and continuing to support entrepreneurs here locally. And then seeing what we can do, with scaling programs like Friends and Family or otherwise. I think that there was a point where I wanted to build like the entrepreneurship hub for Los Angeles. And I think we can do that in really meaningful ways with what we have. But I think that's also just being attuned to what the market looks like, what the challenges and pain points are for founders, and to continue to keep like pulling on that thread to ensure that, our mission is really to build the most thriving, inviting, and inclusive community for entrepreneurs. So I think if in 5 to 10 years, we're continuing to do that, however it looks, like I will be incredibly happy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I totally know what you mean of the pandemic hitting and just having to be flexible, having to react instead of plan. But like you said, one thing's for sure, that mission will stay true. And kind of when you're, when you're in an organization like Grid110 and putting founders first, the needs of the founders, and those needs are constantly changing because the market is constantly changing, and as is everything else. You might not know exactly what supporting that mission will look like, but for sure that you're going to uphold it. So that's awesome. And kind of like jumping off of the mention of friends and family, we had someone who was wondering how Grid110 establishes relationships with some of like the partner orgs and community partners that we work with here in LA, how we kind of establish those foundations and relationships with those organizations and choose who to work with.
Yeah, that's a great question. We are very clear on our mission as well as like some core values to us. So community, generosity, belonging are all really important values to us. We share this when we do info sessions on our website, when we are hiring. We want to make sure that these values align with other potential partners, people that we work with, funders. And so I think that has helped us in terms of navigating like potential partnership relationships. So there's a couple of different ways that we've worked with partners kind of unofficially as well as officially. On the unofficial side, we work with anybody from co-working spaces, the mayor's office, VC funds, other community organizations finding ways to collaborate together. So, are discussing our goals, seeing if they're aligned, if there are overlaps and things that we can bring to the table and vice versa, or if we can help other organizations kind of achieve their goals. We want to be helpful in that way. We've had people come in and speak to our cohorts. We've gone and spoken at other programs. And so really it's how can we be a value add in the community and the ecosystem here. And then on the more formal partnership side, it's typically been people that we have started as maybe more informal relationships. That was like the city of Los Angeles. We had a kind of informal partnership with the mayor's office since we first started. And then that really solidified through funding when they saw the outcomes that we had been able to achieve of running this program for the first 2 years. Same thing happened with the Annenberg Foundation and our partnership around Pledge LA. So I've been on the advisory committee for Pledge LA for the last 2 or 3 years. If you're not familiar, it's a diversity, equity, inclusion initiative, a partnership between the mayor's office, the Annenberg Foundation, and the tech and venture community to really measure and benchmark the DEI efforts on both the venture side, so from who they're hiring to who they're investing in, as well as on the startup side. And it has an opportunity to kind of see how we're doing as an ecosystem in comparison to maybe the national average or other cities. And from recent surveys, I can tell you that LA is far and away kind of leading the way when it comes to specifically investing in Black and Latinx founders and in women. There's still a lot of work to be done there. We can't pat ourselves on the back just yet, but I think it's good to see that the efforts of what's happening here in LA are better than what's happening in other areas of the country. And so kind of just by way of working with Pledge LA, when the opportunity came up the summer of 2020, I think everybody knows what happened, post the murder of George Floyd, where there are a lot of organizations, foundations, corporations throwing commitments at wanting to support the Black community, Black and Brown founders. And there was really an opportunity for the Annenberg Foundation to do something really meaningful with that. It was not just making a one-time commitment. They essentially made a 3-year commitment at a minimum to supporting Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. And so they started, which is now called the Pledge LA Founders Fund. It started as the Fund for South LA Founders, and it was really geared towards Black and Latinx entrepreneurs, first in South LA and now across LA County. So we worked with them last summer. We're going to be working with them this summer and then again next year to run a 3rd cohort. So we really took what was more of an informal kind of community-focused partnership and really solidified that as let's work together because we have very aligned goals. We each bring meaningful things into this relationship, and we want to see success in this area. So that's an example of one of the partner programs that we've done. And then the other one, Friends and Family that I mentioned earlier with Lawson & Co. have had the good fortune of knowing Austin Clements, who is the managing partner over there, as well as his partner, AJ, for a couple of years now, having worked with them, again, as like a community kind of friends and colleagues. He's also on the Pledge LA advisory committee. He was the founding chairman. But just getting a sense for how people work and seeing how authentic they are and how they walk in that work is a really huge signal for me of somebody that I knew that I wanted to do much more work with. And so Austin and AJ were definitely an example of, they've come in and spoken, they've mentored, and it was really like, how can we do more with you? Because I feel like there's so many opportunities here. And so when they raised their first fund, First Lawson & Co., there was an opportunity where they knew that they could only invest in a certain number of companies a year. And there were far more companies out there that they wanted to be able to provide value to. So we joined forces to launch the Friends and Family Accelerator as a way of, closing that access to capital gap, working with entrepreneurs that we were incredibly excited about that are building, innovative solutions to big problems. And it was great just to see, I think, from a kind of teamwork effort, what they brought to the table, what we brought to the table, and how that really impacted the value of the program. So I think it starts with values. And I look at that when you think about who your customers are, who you're trying to bring in as a funder, as a teammate, as a service provider, as a vendor. I think it's oftentimes it's being really thoughtful and intentional about who you bring in, and not just going with maybe like the cheapest, rate, contract, or I guess just being more meaningful around it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. It's great to hear how, many of these relationships just started organically. And I think that's such a great testament to, how connected Grid110, or really how connected you are within this ecosystem, and then how much Grid110's value just speaks for itself. And these partnerships end up just being such a win-win on both sides. So my last question about Grid110 related, and then we'll get into some more general LA startup ecosystem and entrepreneurship and general topics. And again, if anyone has any further questions on Grid110 or anything else, feel free to drop them in the chat. But my last question is from a founder who was wondering, I applied to a Grid110 program, but didn't get accepted. What's your best advice for me when I go to reapply again in the future?
I have a couple answers for this. One is always that if at first you don't succeed, try again, because we have had founders who have applied, a couple of times for our programs. I will say it is fairly competitive. One, there are not very many opportunities to get free programs like ours. Oftentimes you're giving up, you're having to pay money for a program. You're giving up a piece of equity. Worst case, you're giving up both, which really bothers me. I get that there's definitely a values exchange here. And so obviously no shade to companies or organizations that are charging for the work that they are providing and for the value that they're providing. It becomes problematic for me when I feel like founders are being taken advantage of. And we just have the good fortune of having great supporters who want to enable us to provide these types of programs for free. So no cost, no equity, essentially it's free. So that does bring in a number of applications. And with just the bandwidth that our team has, we can only accept so many. And so I think our acceptance rate is somewhere under 10% at this point. But this is why you spend a significant amount of your time providing other free resources, events. Our newsletter, if you all don't subscribe already, is chock full of grants and programs and things that are not things that we're doing, that other people are doing, that we want to make sure that we share with you. So we're always trying to find ways to continue to provide value back to y'all, even if it's not necessarily working directly with us. But I will say that there are people that, a couple of founders who applied a couple of times and got in on maybe their second or third. And the thing that really stood out was they were able to kind of showcase to us what had they done since the last time that they applied. I read almost every single application myself. I've seen people repeat apply, some unfortunately with this almost same exact application as the last time. I will look up to see what did they apply with the last time? Their name sounds really familiar. And if you can show us what you've been able to do since that last time, any meaningful progress that you've been able to have, whether it's you brought a new person onto your team, whether it's you were able to kind of build a prototype or an MVP, maybe you had a really exciting partnership opportunity, maybe you pivoted, anything that really shows us that, what have you done in the time since, we weren't able to work together. I think those are kind of helpful things that have happened. I would also say that we're not the only program that exists. I think this is the best time to be building a company because there are so many resources that are available to you, especially virtually. I think that's been a kind of silver lining of what's happened with the pandemic, is really seeing the access and accessibility to different programs that used to be maybe more regionally focused and maybe took place in person. And now it's with things like Clubhouse and Spaces and Zoom and different types of conferences. I think you've got access to so many more things that are happening right now. So really take the initiative to, sign up for these events and learn from people. There are a number of the things that we teach in our programs are available widely. So books, YouTube, whatever it might be. I think the thing that makes it special is you get that kind of individualized one-on-one attention, which we recognize is important. So getting that feedback of like, how does this video and this concept apply to me and my business is really helpful. So if there are other spaces, communities, founder groups that you can join, even just finding and connecting with maybe some other founder that's here, and the opportunity to kind of talk back and forth about what you're doing, the challenges that you're facing, getting feedback from as many people as you can talk to. I think those are the things that can be beneficial with, with what you're doing. I think that oftentimes people are afraid to talk about what they're building, and have seen it sometimes even in applications, like they're very vague or it's very general. And you just want to be like as explicit and articulate as you can about the problem that you're solving and your solution to that problem. So I guess like as an application tip, and not just for our program, but for any program, is get really clear on what the problem that you're solving is. Because I think a lot of times people lead with their solution, and that's great, but like we want to understand why this thing needs to exist. And then why are you the person to build it? I think those three things are really helpful to us to really understand, is this something that stands out to us? Is this something like we understand that they understand what the need is? And if you can convey that to us or to anybody that you're talking to, I think you'll see some meaningful progress come from that.
100%, 100%. And I do want to address, before we move on, Denise had a really great follow-up question. And I also saw your question, Catherine, and we'll touch on that in a second. But going to what Denise asked, having worked with so many startups that are moving to growth businesses, what are three characteristics they have that you find leads to, a scalable business? But also, I just want to point out the fact that I really love how Grid110 doesn't just look for scalable businesses. We do work with brick and mortars, and a lot of more like some in our portfolio there are like local businesses. But then we also have those who are, go on to the venture route and become very scaled up. So yeah, with that question, what have you seen as far as like characteristics for scalable businesses?
All right, my dogs are growling in the background, so I was trying to be on mute. So I think a couple of things really stand out to me. And this can be somewhere depending on if you are trying to grow a venture scale business, or if you're just looking to have a side hustle business or a quote unquote lifestyle business or something that is more sustainable in growth. But I think we talked about this earlier. It's the kind of notion of being coachable, and so coming into programs and spaces like this, and really being, honest and candid about the areas that you need help. And so being able to whether identify if there are specific milestones that you have, taking advantage of every opportunity that's placed in front of you. So really leaning into the process. Like if you have someone's captive attention, whether that's for a 30-minute coffee chat, a 5-minute, you're walking and talking through a conference or something like that, it's really taking advantage of that time that you have with them, kind of being ambitious about that. And so I think that's one thing, kind of regardless of the type of business that you're building. Specifically to speak to kind of the growth stage businesses, it's the companies and the founders that I've talked to have had a really big vision for what they want to do. And ultimately that's what investors are looking for, is they want to know that what the idea that you have, it's going to be this massive opportunity, and that it can reach a lot of people. But it's they're so clear on what it is that they're trying to do and where they want to take it, even if they're only going to start here. And so they have this really big picture vision, but they know that it's going to take kind of certain steps or phases to get there. And they're not trying to do all of that at once. They're trying to start with this audience, or with this focus and with this product. And I think it's helpful to know the bigger picture of what you're trying to do, but also know that you've done the work that you need to do to be but I know that I'm going to start here and I'm going to like absolutely nail this part of it. And then we're going to expand into this, and then we're going to expand into this. So I think it's kind of having that approach of understanding, that this is going to take a while to do, and that you need to get that validation first, and then really be able to kind of like knock that out of the park. On the third one, I'm trying to think of what else is beneficial. I mean, I think, again, just leveraging opportunities, being really resourceful, and knowing that you can't do it alone, and seeking out the right type of help. So whether that's being, having the opportunity to be able to hire people, to partner with people, to just seek out the resources that might be outside of your own individual capacity, that will enable your business to grow in really meaningful ways.
Definitely. And yeah, thank you to Denise for submitting some really thoughtful questions here in the chat. I know we were going to move on to a few questions about the startup landscape in general. With just under 15 minutes left, I think it might be a little bit helpful to move on to some of the questions that we got from founders who just kind of like need advice. One being someone who said, moving from a different state, how do I find my tribe in the founder and investor community in LA? I know you've kind of already touched, bits and pieces on this with your answers from other questions, but really how they can just start to insert themselves, best practices for networking and getting into the community.
Yeah, so my approach has kind of been digital first and then in person second. So I utilize the shit out of Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm an introvert, so networking is like in person, like social, like events, happy hours, like those types of things, unless I know who's going or I have like a clear idea of what the agenda is going to be at the event, I have social anxiety about. And even if I know people that are there, it takes a lot out of me. It's like very draining from an energy perspective. And so I find that I've just been able to establish better relationships and build those relationships through digital platforms. And so that can be from, I've used Twitter to get a job, hire people, get funding, find investments. So I scout on the side for a couple of different funds. I've had somebody reach out to me that I've invested in, and I've reached out to somebody that I saw on Twitter that I've invested in. And so I think that there's, good things and bad things about Twitter and all the things that are happening with it right now. But I feel like it's still kind of an underrated platform when it comes to connections and who you have access to in that way. And so a lot of the tech community is very active on Twitter, particularly in LA. If you search the hashtag long LA, I think you'll find people that were either at events or promoting events or things that are happening. Esprit Devora, We Are LA Tech, does a great job she's got a couple of different podcasts. She has the We Are LA Tech podcast that highlights kind of innovators in the LA tech area, as well as the Women in Tech show that highlights specifically, women founders and women in the technology space. She, I think, is getting more active in putting together events that are happening. I think there's actually a We Are LA Tech Twitter community, because I think Twitter just rolled out community feature a couple of months ago. So there's a Twitter community named that if you want to join that. Again, just using Twitter to search Eventbrite, you can find events that are happening all the time on Eventbrite, especially now that things are happening more in person. And sometimes they're still, virtual too. So I think, using the digital platforms that you have access to, just to see, what's upcoming, what's happening here in the area. There's oftentimes different pitch competitions or events, happy hours in all different parts of town, whether it's on the west side, the east side, Pasadena, Glendale, Hollywood. I think it's really exciting that because LA is so large, it has really given rise to different pocket communities that have risen up to support, which is exactly what Grid110 did initially to start with downtown LA. So it does take effort, it does take initiative to kind of reach out, find a friend to go with you, or meet a friend, like make a goal to just meet one person at one of these events to get plugged in. Maybe ask them who should I chat with? Like, do you know somebody that I should chat with? Like, here's what I'm working on. Like, it's a good time to practice your pitch of whatever business that you're working on. Use that time to just establish a good connection with somebody, follow up with them afterwards. Follow up is super important. I'm really big on building relationships and not having like treating them as transactional. And so however you can invest in those types of relationships, you honestly have no idea what's going to happen. So those are a couple of my tips. And if anybody here knows of like organizations or groups or things that you would recommend, like please drop them in the chat too. I want this to really be a collaborative opportunity for people. If you run an organization, if you're running an event, like please shamelessly share like Gary is doing. And I think it's really important to have those opportunities to connect. Thanks, Gary.
100% agree. Yeah, thank you, Gary. I'm gonna actually copy down some of these links. This is awesome. And also kind of jumping off that question, we got a number of questions submitted, and then someone was also talking in the chat, but I've also just heard personally from a lot of founders who say like they have an idea, or they have some traction, but they're really looking for like a co-founder or like tech partners. Like they're looking to build out their team, not necessarily start like hiring formally, but they're just trying to find that right person to go all in on with. And so, I mean, given that Grid110 had like 7 co-founders, I don't think you were lacking in that aspect. So not sure if you've ever had to deal with personally, but any tips for founders in that situation?
Yeah, I will say that while it was very much like a committee-driven organization for the first 2 to 3 years, that settled down a little, because I mean, decision by committee can be an impossible thing. This is also why we spent a year trying to figure out what we were even going to do before we started doing anything. And we really had a hard time nailing down exactly what it was, because I think everybody had different ideas. And so I think when you approach it, if you're a solo founder looking for a co-founder, kind of trying to understand like, what is it that you're looking for in this? Is it because you don't want to do this by yourself? Is it because you realize that there are gaps kind of that you are looking to fill with somebody else, that you will be able to go further if you have somebody who has complementary skill sets on your team? And then kind of figuring out like, what is it that you might be lacking? Is it something you can outsource or hire for? Or is it that you're truly looking for a collaborative partner in this effort? I think there are a couple of ways that you can go about doing that. One, again, going to some of these events and just talking about what you're doing, because you never know. Did I just freeze? You never know who you're going to meet, or what might happen as a result of that. Be really specific if you have an ask. If you are looking for a co-founder, if you're looking for a technical co-founder, a specific partner, like if somebody asks you like, how can I help? Because I think a lot of times you'll hear that, right? Like, how can I help? This is what I'm looking for. Do you know anybody like XYZ skills or talents or abilities, or who might be interested, or who you think I should talk to about what I'm doing? I know the question was really specific to around like technical talent also. And like, we're fortunate, for those of us in Los Angeles, that we graduate the most engineering talent in Southern California of any region in the country. There's extremely strong engineering talent that's coming out of the school systems here because of the computer science programs that are leaving to go to Silicon Valley, to New York, or I guess now anywhere, because a lot of companies are going to remote. But you have access to this talent in your backyard. So if you're looking specifically to hire talent, like most of these schools have job fairs and career fairs, or like programs that you can connect with their graduates and students. And then I'll drop a community suggestion. So a friend of mine, James Oliver Jr., he's based in Atlanta. He has 2 entities. So this is his latest startup. He also has a foundation that supports Black parent entrepreneurs, and does grants and provides therapy and like does a whole bunch of amazing things. So any Black parent entrepreneurs in this room, check out the Parentpreneur Foundation. James's startup, specifically Kabila, is focusing on kind of creating a community to find co-founders. So recognizing that you may have an idea for something, but you're like specifically looking for a partner to do this work with. They're trying to kind of figure out like whether it's matchmaking or more organically developing these relationships. So there are some communities that are like this, that are really aiming to kind of pair you up with a co-founder, or even just like a supportive community so that you don't have to do this by yourself.
That is so awesome. Thank you everyone for, interacting in the chat. I'm going to be saving down all these resources, and I'll be sure to share them out in a recap email with the recording of this session as well. So with just under 5 minutes left, I guess we'll get to a very last question that can be a little broader. But someone was wondering, specific to LA, given your roots here and all that you've been involved in, what, in your opinion, what industries do you think we can expect LA to attract more talent and companies in over the next 5 to 10 years? Or, are there any emerging trends that we should kind of get excited about or founders could start to hop on?
Yeah, I get excited about everything that's not Web3. I'll be honest with you. I think that one of the great things about Los Angeles, and we have a very strong emerging Web3 community here because we have such a creative community here in Los Angeles. With the dominant industry really being, and still to this day, entertainment, you have wildly creative people that are here. And so when you pair problems that can be solved with technology with wildly creative people, like there's so many different opportunities. I think that's why we've seen, from like content creation and like the creator economy has really taken rise a lot here in Los Angeles. We have TikTok that's based here, which has now kind of become my go-to thing for learning and recipes and fashion and fun Gen Z trends and all the things. But I think that there are a lot of different tentpoles that LA is putting in the ground. So whether it's on the bioscience and healthcare side, like we've got a really strong hospital system, Bioscience LA, for anybody who's building in like the bioscience and life science space, is a really great community space in Culver City that just opened a couple of months ago. Lots of opportunities there. There are a number of different accelerator programs that are specifically focusing on healthcare as well. Aerospace is huge here because of like transportation needs and the space that we have. And I think the thing that one of the industries that I've always been really excited about and have seen just continual growth in is anything kind of like CPG or e-commerce related. I think it tends to be one of the easier, I will say, not easy, but easier businesses to get off the ground because of platforms like Shopify and Squarespace and all the different tools that exist to help people start their businesses in that way, where you don't necessarily need to build the technical product, that you can just pay a fee to use somebody else's platform. And so I think, again, the opportunities to market those types of products and services through platforms like TikTok or really creative marketing avenues, I think we'll continue to see take hold and shape here in Los Angeles.